Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another cool update for you from the brand Richard Legrand. Essentially, they are a micro brand focusing on combining classic aesthetics with modern components and finishing, which seems to be like a pretty good recipe for success when it comes to the micro brand realm, especially at these price points under $500. Here, even under $400 at $389. You might recognize this watch because it's kind of their main watch, and this is its latest iteration. The last time you saw this was actually known as the Odyssey Mark III, but this is the successor, which is just considered now the Oceanfarer. So it's kind of grown into its own, and there have been some slight tweaks, and I think there's ones that a lot of you guys have asked for. So that's something that I think is really special and different when it comes to micro brand watches, because every time they do another batch, they are taking everybody's feedback and they're applying it to the next batch. So you get these little, fun refinements as you go, and you can kind of work towards that perfect, if quote unquote, watch. Now, some key common characteristics in design language when you're looking for a watch like this, I'd consider it a dive watch. So of course you're going to want water resistance, typically with some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is only nice if on bracelets. So this Oceanfarer model, this is the Ocean Blue, and one of the big changes, aside from a couple of aesthetic tweaks, is that it now comes with female end links. So with all that said, let's zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys. Now, as you can see, obviously an absolute looker, and I think with this dark blue motif, it definitely makes it very, very versatile and very wearable because of just how nice it is. It's not super vibrant of a blue, so it's going to pretty much match with anything, but it's dark enough to where it's going to give you similar levels of versatility as just a black and steel watch. Now, again, as I mentioned, $389 direct, which is an outstanding price considering the specs. You have a 40 millimeter diameter, a 13 millimeter height, and it's actually, just so you guys know, without counting this crystal here that protrudes just a hair, it's actually only 11.5, so that's pretty nice. It is also 46 millimeters lug to lug, and because of the female end links, now that lug to lug isn't extended beyond anymore, which is definitely a nice change of pace. Of course, full stainless steel, all brushed, essentially with a couple of high polished bevels there. Very nicely done. And you have this beautiful flat polish, which absolutely catches and plays with the light. Really gorgeous. And then it's actually brushed throughout the sides, which is great. And I think it gives it a more tool-like appearance. Of course, you also do have the signed crown and some polished highlights there, as well as some polished highlights on this very nice deep stamped case back there. So really beautiful, nice nautical theme there with the diving bell helmet, and then the anchors. So very nice from that standpoint as well. And then of course everything's fully milled, nice and solid. So really great from that standpoint. Also, guys, let's go ahead and give this a turn here. So 120 click bezel. Nice clickiness to it, fairly smooth, not too much play in there. Lines up pretty much on point there, so really nice. And then again, as you can see, the way the blue from that sapphire inlay bezel plays with the blue on the dial, it actually does a great job kind of color and tone matching. Although it's a bit of a different texture to it, it definitely still locks in quite well, and I think looks really, really nice. So you have the 120 click bezel, you have a screw down crown that's signed really nicely. The movement is a Miyota 9039. This doesn't have a date, and it does also is no date specific, the movement, so you don't have to worry about a ghost position, which is always a nice little bonus. You have that nice dark sunburst blue dial with applied indices. You have Super Luminova BGW9. You have water resistance up to 200 meters. And, you know, here's where we start getting into a little bit more of the differences. You know what? Let's do this very quickly. let's pull out the last iteration. So as you can see on the dial, slightly different. The dial text, a little bit more minimalist in the previous run. Here, it I think helps fill the dial a little bit better with the Oceanfarer automatic and also the change of the font versus here. We had the Oceanfarer in red with a single line, which I think is still good looking, especially because the red ties into that red seconds hand tip, which is really quite lovely. But I think that it's a little bit more balanced and fills the dial a little bit nicer in this latest iteration. But the main difference here, guys, is the bracelet. As you can see, male end link versus female end link. So now when you look at this, you can see how much extra those end links guide the bracelet off of the case there. So here, as you can see, it's just gonna drape straight down. So if you have a really small wrist, it's gonna contour to it quite nicely. Here, if you have a smaller wrist, it's gonna kind of jut out a little bit, but generally your wrist, it's, you know, when it's on you, it's gonna look fine. I think the real issue with this, it wasn't necessarily the male end link design, it's just the fact that it aesthetically doesn't really suit this. It's actually quite rounded versus here, these are all quite, you know, flat and squared off. Then you kind of have this rounded finger there on the male end link, which I think was a bit of a loss. But the nice thing is it actually offered quick release spring bars for quicker changes there on the bracelet or straps or whatever you want to put on. So that was very nice. But essentially, it's all the same when it comes to everything else with the taper and everything. Essentially, from that standpoint. So as far as this bracelet goes, though, you do have the 20mm end links. And then it also is a really nice tapering flat brushed multi-link bracelet. It tapers from 20mm down to 18mm. You also get this beautiful fully milled and signed 20mm clasp. Has a nice little bevel there, although it's not high polished. It does add a little bit of dimension. You also do have the micro adjusts, and you have, of course, a fully milled construction here, so no folded material there, which is very nice. The pins that connect the links together are actually pin and collar, and I think this thing is pretty sweet. I think, you know, it in black, the previous range was a good looking watch. I think this end link does offer a lot of value and makes it feel a bit more refined. But let's go ahead and get this piece on the wrist. Okay, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, this 40mm watch wears absolutely beautifully. Of course, up close with a, you know, that wristy there, it's gonna appear with some lens distortion. It's gonna look a little bit bigger. But as you get down and away from the lens, you can see that there's actually, the watch is quite centered on the wrist. It doesn't overhang, and obviously, man, this light show is absolutely fantastic in terms of that flat polished bracelet. And then now with the female end link there, it ties in quite nicely. One thing I will say is there can be a bit of a gap there. As you can see, it doesn't flow quite as perfectly and tightly as I would have hoped, but when compared to the male end link, I think it's definitely a much better choice. And then also, of course, depends on your wrist, right? So if I had a wider, flatter wrist, it would pull it out and choke it out a little bit more, and it would look much tighter. But because my wrist is only 7¾ inches, it's wrapping a little bit more down sloping, which creates a bit of a gap there. But I think it looks absolutely great, and it's probably something that many of you would not have even noticed had I not pointed it out as a bit of a reviewer nitpick. But look at the way the light just rolls off of that flat link bracelet. I love it. Very, very nice. This is something, a feature that I'm really happy to see is becoming popular and really becoming in style, because there are so many levels you can do with the flat polished and adding bevels in and contours. It really creates quite a light show, and does offer as well a nice different look versus your typical kind of oyster link style or beads of rice or jubilee. When you get something like this, I think it does add quite a bit of personality. And I think obviously with the squared off numerals and the, you know, relatively angular case there, and you can see that the crown, I'm sorry, not the crown guards, but the the lugs, there you go. The lugs turn down quite nicely. And man, I can't get over this light show, guys. Look at that. Absolutely beautiful. I love the blue as well. So let's actually set up some low light transition and loom shots and move into some closing thoughts. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, that BGW9 is doing a great job shining there. You know, not quite as bright behind the bezel as it is on those nicely applied indices, but that's kind of to be expected. And I gotta say, this is by no means a disappointment. It's more of a refined look anyway, so I believe that it works to its advantage because it's obviously not super loom intensive or anything like that. It's really meant to be kind of a more reserved and restrained design overall. But one thing I also like to do during these loom shots is work in some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field getting direct sunlight. A lot of the times you're going to be coming in and out of a building, in and out of a vehicle, walking underneath an overhang. And you can see here, you can watch the way the light plays with the dial and bezel insert, as well as those beautifully flat brushed links there. Also, I can get into some more harsh lighting conditions. As you can see, very, very high contrast, which typically will expose imperfections. Here you can see it exposes a little fingerprint or two on the bracelet. But I assure you that's easily kind of wiped away. But I really, really do enjoy looking at the brushing, seeing how uniform it is as it glides over. So really beautiful from that standpoint. Also, the color play and the color palette, you can get a nice idea of that beautiful, deep, dark midnight blue. The dial goes quite black. It has a very high contrast streak that goes through it on the sunray versus some that are really bright and vibrant, that are kind of a brighter, maybe white through a blue. Here you're seeing basically a bright, vibrant blue through almost a near black or midnight blue. So with that said, guys, closing thoughts. All right, on the wrist, really classic proportions that fit almost any situation. They definitely nailed the timeless design aesthetic here with something that really screams, kind of mid-century diver, but adding a bit of a modern twist to it, so I can definitely appreciate that. As far as model variants go, there's a polar white dial as well as a black on black model. The polar white does have a black bezel insert. So there are some small variances here, the blue being probably the most colorful. The white looks very, very nice. And then of course there's a classic black similar to the one you saw, but updated and upgraded. When I think of comparable models, there are a lot of vintage inspired big crowns that are out there, from Tudor to Oris to Zodiac, but this one really packs a punch at the price point, guys. Excuse me. And thank you to everybody who's who's watching the video this far in and is blessing me right now in the comments. I much appreciated. You guys are the best. But one thing to kind of get back to is this really packs a punch at the price point, even when you compare it to very, very popular, kind of vintage inspired big crown divers like the NTH sub. This has a more of a modern infused aesthetic to it versus the more classic kind of big crown looks of the NTH, but it's a lot cheaper. And not to say that NTH isn't a great option. I think they look pretty fantastic, to be honest. But with that, you get something here that's similarly spec'd for a much lower price point. So that's there for you, but you do kind of have to act fast on these because the batches do sell out quite quick. So definitely check the links below for current availability. For me, guys, bottom line here, you have a very handsome and capable sports watch offering a ton of value. So for me, being a huge blue diver fan, I feel like this is a really nice sweet spot in terms of the color, the type of blue, the look, the aesthetic, the bracelet, the way everything kind of comes together to create something that is really special, but at the same time, quite clean, right, and uncluttered. I feel like a lot of times you get these companies that go after these really crazy and wild themes, and you kind of get a much busier, more polarizing aesthetic. Here, you're getting something that doesn't look like an homage watch, but at the same time can fit in between a bunch of classic divers. You kind of put this in the lineup, and it's gonna fit, and it's gonna feel like it has a space there, and not necessarily one because it's trying to look like any other watch, but they, instead of matching design points and design cues, they managed to things like balance and the aesthetic and the proportions, versus kind of direct features or traits. So with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.